Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Fire Breathing Rob. Please like, subscribe, and share our videos. We are a progressive millennial podcast, sometimes featured on our radio stations, on 10 of them. And also, besides that, we're also making this YouTube podcast to show all over Facebook. And even if you're not on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you want to do, please feature these videos because we have amazing interviews with amazing people. I have somebody that I've learned about through the progressive movement. He is over in Oregon, and he is Mayor Mark Gamba of Milwaukie, not Wisconsin, but Oregon. And he's a former National Geographic photographer who has, he's had a firsthand look at climate change. He's running for Congress in Oregon's 5th District against Kurt Schrader. So, Mayor, thanks so much for coming on the program. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, so Mayor, with all the craziness going on with the coronavirus, it's in full swing, and it's actually getting a lot worse, whether the president's going to say it or not. I mean, that's what we've heard from a lot of governors, doctors, and nurses, that it's getting worse. How are you handling this crisis as a mayor?
Well, last week, the 25 metro mayors, so there's right around the Portland metro region, there are 25 cities, and we formed an organization a few years back called the Metro Mayors Consortium. We meet once a month to work on various state-level laws that would affect our cities. We all met, by phone, the way we're all meeting these days, to talk about doing a stronger stay-at-home program than Oregon had so far. We know that we don't have nearly enough personal protective equipment. We know that we don't have nearly enough ventilators, ICU units, isolation units, any of that stuff. So if the coronavirus, when it picks up steam like it will, we will have doctors and hospitals that are overwhelmed. So the mayors had a strong interest in seeing people self-isolate a lot more, and reached out to the governor. So we wrote a letter asking the governor to do it. She did. Her stay-at-home order was a little looser than we would have liked. We had specifically recognized types of businesses that we were going to allow to stay open, like grocery stores, the people who supply web service, all the things we have to continue to have. But if they were non-essential businesses, we were asking that they be closed. She left it a little more open than that, and I'm daily, dealing with emails and phone calls from people that are concerned. Either they're an employee there and they don't feel like they're safe, or they're somebody that goes there and they don't feel like the employees are safe. So it's an ongoing process.
So let me ask you this, Mayor Gamba. Now, we have the Congress and the president. They're fighting right now over a bill to help out, our nurses, our doctors, the American people, because a lot of people aren't on work. I am a teacher down here. I'm in Florida. We're out of work. I actually work a second job seasonally at a hotel. The hotel shut down, so I'm not getting any income from that. We're doing some online teaching now that's about to start. But, it's tough for us also. How do you feel the Congress has done, and also President Trump's done in this response? We're just hearing today, Mayor, that President Trump wants to get everybody outside before Easter. Yeah. And also Mike Pence is going and saying, if you're sick, you can work, just wear the mask. I mean, what is wrong with these guys? Are they in a different planet than we're living in right now? It's crazy.
They are so, Trump has been hanging his hat on re-election on the stock market and the economy, and this terrifies him. He knows that this is going to tank the stock market and the economy, and it terrifies him that it will cost him the election. And he really doesn't care about people. I mean, that's been obvious from the beginning of his time in office. He really doesn't give a shit about normal people. So what do I think? I think that the federal government is utterly failing. I think we
Yeah.
we had lots of warning. We had as much warning as South Korea had. We had as much warning as Singapore and Japan had as to what was coming. It was really obvious it was coming to anybody that was paying attention. We
Mhm.
should have been, he should have used the whatever that War Powers Act is called. I always forget the name of it, but the act that
Right.
allows him to cause manufacturers to make certain things. He should have used that months ago to cause testing kits to be widely available, to cause the PPE to be widely available, to cause ventilators and all the things that they need for intensive care units. Those should have been ramped up into production 2.5 months ago, and they still aren't. We are in a position right now. It's the most ridiculous, horrible thing I've ever heard. You have states bidding against other states with manufacturers to get the materials that they need. So he's turning this pandemic into a price war, a bidding war
Right.
on life-saving materials.
Yeah.
It's
Scary.
horrific. It's literally a crime against humanity.
And I'm scared, and I have elderly parents, and my mom has asthma, as do I, and I'm deathly scared to go out, to any kind of restaurant. No, I mean, you can't go into restaurants, but to go out in general, even outside, because if I catch this, I am going to be in some deep trouble, even though I'm a millennial with my asthma. So I'm really scared. It's, and we're seeing a lot of millennials also now going into the hospital, 20% now, where they said, oh, if you're a young person, young guy, young girl, you can get away with it. Whereas now we're seeing that it affects us just as much, or as, somebody that's an elderly person. But I want to talk about this. We saw it throughout, I've talked to quite a few candidates on this program, Mayor Gamba, and, it seems like a lot of the coronavirus is really hurting their campaigns. They're not obviously able to do campaign rallies, not able to shake hands, meet people. Everything is digital. Everything is Facebook and Instagram and Twitter now. How has the coronavirus affected your campaign?
Well, the coronavirus is utterly changed. I mean, we are building a new airplane as we fly it.
Right.
It's nuts. Our campaign was based on the doors. We had 1,400 volunteers signed up to knock doors for us, and we got in whatever it was 2 or 3 weeks as the weather started to get good here in Oregon, and that was it. The coronavirus started. We were one of the first campaigns actually to call for an end to public gatherings. We had so many house parties scheduled this month. That's the other part that's killing us, is fundraising. The vast majority of our funds are coming from house parties because we're not taking corporate money at all.
Right.
So, we get some online donations, and I've got people that regularly donate too, but the vast majority was from house parties. And we literally, I think, had 15 house parties that we had to cancel this month. So not only can we not knock doors, but we don't have the money to pivot to something like, advertising. So we are all online. I'm trying to do daily live Facebook broadcasts. We're trying some house parties digitally, but it's
tough.
It's not the same. So it's going to be interesting.
Mayor Gamba here on Fire Breathing Rob, the mayor of Milwaukie, Oregon here, running for Congress. Mayor, I'm definitely going to get on Bernie a little bit into the interview and Medicare for All. That is something that needs to be said, as you have already said it just now. But I want to get into have the viewers and the voters, I guess, know a little bit more about you. What got you into politics?
Climate change.
Okay.
So as you said at the top, I was a National Geographic photographer. I've seen a lot of the world. I was seeing, I knew about it, 30, 35 years ago, whenever Al Gore gave his speech on the floor of the Senate. And I've done a lot of reading about it. So I had some idea of what it was going to look like. And I also had some idea of their projections on how long it would take for that to begin to happen. And in working underwater and up around glaciers, I was beginning to see the changes much earlier than were predicted. I was seeing coral reefs bleaching. I was seeing glaciers that had receded by miles, like 5 and 6 and 7 miles worth of glacier that had receded. And that's not natural, right? That's not part of the normal cycle of growth. And so it was clear to me that climate change was happening. It was clear to me that it was happening faster than anybody thought it was supposed to. And it was also clear to me eventually that the federal government wasn't doing a goddamn thing about it. They, I mean, it's shocking to me for, you know, people's responsibility is the well-being of a whole nation of people. And they're told by scientists, here is this thing that will literally, within 80, 90, 100 years, cause the human race to become nearly extinct, if not extinct. And they don't do anything about it. So anyway, I was just depressed about it for quite a while. And finally, I just decided to run for office. And since I wasn't a billionaire, I couldn't run for president. So I ran for city council instead.
Right.
And now, you know, Milwaukie has one of the strongest climate action plans in the state, and we're implementing it. We have, because of our climate action plan, our county is also doing one. There's 2 bigger cities, Bend and Salem, that are now using our climate action plan as their model. There's another county down on the coast that's doing it. So the thing I set out to do, which was to show the example that, look, a little blue collar town can address climate and not destroy the economy, you know, which is the usual line of argument. Yeah. And so we have proved that model, and it was working. If we had another 35 years, it would have been a decent way to go. But when the IPCC report came out, whatever it was now, almost 2 years ago, and I saw that we had at that time 12 years to stop the worst effects of it, I was like, okay, I can't, just doing what I'm doing locally isn't going to cut it. I need to run for Congress, because Schrader, who has been my congressman now since the last redistricting, is terrible on climate. He's a Democrat theoretically, but he voted for the Keystone XL pipeline. He voted to allow American oil to be exported. He's got a climate bill in Congress right now. He's partnering up with a coal state legislator. They've written this bill that basically gives the coal companies and the oil companies and the fracking companies billions of dollars for the next 10 years to develop carbon capture and sequestration. And then in 10 years, they're required to start using it. And I'm like, Kurt, in 10 years, it's game over.
Yeah.
We have to be doing it now.
They don't understand that. Mr. Mayor, I want to tell you this, though. It could be even less than 10 years, because we look at what's happening in California with the wildfires. We look at what's happening here in Florida. In Miami, if it's a pretty heavy rainstorm, a lot of the streets down in Miami flood. You look at even over in Brazil, where the Amazon rainforest, rather, is being burned to a crisp. That's the world's lungs right at hand being burned down. So I believe it's even less than that, and we're in deep trouble, as you've stated throughout this program. And it's scary for people, you know, whatever age group you are, people that are my age, people that are younger than me, because, you know, we may not be able to live in Florida or even California or other coastal states, New Orleans. You look back at Hurricane Katrina in 2005, but we could go on about that for decades.
Well, yeah, in Miami, actually, it doesn't even have to rain. If you have a king tide on a sunny day, the streets flood about a foot and a half deep in some places, because it's just coming back up through the storm sewers. The ocean is coming back up through the storm sewers. it is absolutely happening, and we are in for a significant change no matter what we do now. What we do in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years will be the deciding factor as to whether it's survivable or not.
Mr. Mayor, it's almost like some of these people, they don't think that the climate change is going to affect them. Now, we do know climate change is going to hit hard the most vulnerable among us in the impoverished areas first, but it's going to hit rich people, poor people, and eventually in the same amount, which is scary that they're just not taking any kind of initiative on this action for the most part in Congress or on the presidential level.
Yeah.
But I want to get into this question. Working at National Geographic, I'm sure you saw quite a few amazing views of the world. You talked about the glaciers and seeing other parts of the world. Did that really shape your worldview, getting involved in photography and working in that type of job?
Yes, I think it was. I mean, some of it is the photography itself and those kinds of assignments, because when you're sent on assignment for National Geographic, you're expected to know a lot of stuff. So every assignment I had, I did a lot of research before I went on it. And so there's that piece of it. But I think it's just being in the world and sort of outside of the US bubble. You know, so many people in America think that everything about America is better than anywhere else in the world. And it's just simply not true. One of the early really striking things to me, I was down in Chile and I was in a park one day and ended up in a conversation with a bunch of young kids. I would say they were probably middle school age kids. And they started talking to me about John F. Kennedy, and all these details about John F. Kennedy and his life and his philosophies and all these things. It was stuff I had not been taught in school as an American, you know, one of our greatest presidents. And these Chilean kids knew way more about it. And that was kind of my first wake up call. So I started paying attention at that point to things like that. And, you know, anything from healthcare to education to a lot of stuff, even the way they're dealing with their environment. There's a lot of countries that are way ahead of the US.
I agree. Working in the education system now and also going to a college and having my master's degree at a college that was over 20% international students. They, you know, some of those students, not all of them, but, you know, a good majority of them knew some stuff that, you know, about politics, because that's what one of the subjects I studied rather. They knew some of the stuffs that a lot of the American kids in the class didn't even know. So I totally agree with you. But that shows, you know, I'm a teacher and I love our teachers. It's mainly these, you know, people that, as our governor is, they focus on testing and they focus on all these standardized tests. And that's not teaching any of our students anything. And they really hurt teachers by doing that. And in Florida, they actually base a lot of the pay on how many students pass those standardized tests, which is a travesty and really hurting our teachers. Not sure if they do that where you are, but they do it in Florida, and it's really disgraceful because it, you know, doesn't give a lot of power to the teacher to focus on the student learning in general.
No, it's very distressing. And you know, college, a lot of my youngest daughter actually moved to England to go to college because even though she was a 4.0 student and was getting all kinds of scholarships from the US colleges, it was still cheaper for her to go to London and pay full boat than it was for her to go to school with a bunch of scholarships here in the US.
I mean, that's disgraceful. And, you know, we need to be able to work on these issues. And Bernie Sanders, thankfully, has brought up a lot of these issues. I want to get back to the photography thing quickly as the last question on that aspect. Any amazing stories that, you know, touched you working for National Geographic? I know you spoke about the Chilean students, but any kind of stories with any kind of animals or being in Antarctica, watching the glaciers, anything like that?
Yeah, there was a one story that I tell at some of my events that was pretty moving. It was back in 2000. I was shooting for the Geographic. I was working off of the west coast of Australia, off the Ningaloo Reef in the Indian Ocean. And the water that day was really thick with plankton. And I was just shooting with just working with mass snorkel and fins. And of course I had my camera and housing. And out of this thick, gloomy water comes a school bus sized whale shark.
Wow.
With a mouth about 6 feet wide. And this shark is coming right at me. Now,
Gosh.
I know that whale sharks are plankton feeders, right?
Yeah.
But my lizard brain just sees this really, really big shark headed right at me. So I took a quick breath and I dove down to the shark's level and I started shooting, and it's still coming straight at me. So I start swimming backwards as fast as I could. And I'm thinking that eventually this shark, when it gets close, it will turn away from me. At the last second, when I was almost out of breath and it was obvious the shark wasn't turning, I kind of tucked the housing of the camera into my chest so I wouldn't hurt the shark, and I ducked under its mouth.
Wow.
And as I'm rolling down the belly of this shark, it occurred to me that as I passed that big giant tail, if it whacked me, I could be knocked unconscious.
Yeah.
And obviously it didn't. And I popped up and checked the camera. I was out of film. So I swam over to the dive boat, and the captain came up to me and he said, "That was wild. As the shark passed over you, it sort of rose up in the water column a little bit. And as the tail passed you, it stopped finning."
Wow.
So the shark
That's incredible.
was trying to keep from hurting me.
Wow.
And that moment ended up being my second cover for National Geographic Adventure. And that very close encounter with an obviously sentient and obviously empathetic being
Right.
just made me even more fall in love with the natural world and all of the amazing creatures we share this planet with.
Right. Wow. What a story. That is incredible. Wow. I can't believe it. I was thinking something else happened, but thankfully, the shark didn't clip you or knock you out or even bite you. That's incredible. I want to talk more about climate change in this interview. You saw the firsthand, with the ice caps melting. We talked about that. A lot of these glaciers are hurting polar bears and other Arctic animals where they can't survive because there's they're basically no food over there or anything. Can you talk about climate change and how that was when working with National Geographic?
Well, like I said, those were some of the first indicators I saw. The coral reefs bleaching was the other piece where there would be whole patches of coral reef that was just white instead of the beautiful oranges and pinks and everything that coral usually is. And I asked a scientist that happened to be on the boat that day, and he said, "Well, we're not sure. There's a couple things it could be, but one of the things we think it might be is that it's because the water is warming, and the oh, now I'm going to forget their names, but the little tiny creatures that live on the coral, which actually is what makes the color, can't survive in water that's that warm, so they're dying off." And that, at that point, that was just one of his guesses as to why it might be bleaching, but it really stuck in my head. And now, you can turn on any nature show and they'll talk about the whole barrier reef is bleaching out. So that was definitely one of the first pieces. I think it's more subtle in a lot of ways than I wish it was. It's things like I grew up in Western Colorado, up in the mountains, and every winter, the snow that was plowed to the side of the road would be overhead high every single winter when I was a kid. And for the last 10, 15 years, it barely snows in town. And when it does, they plow it, it's gone in 2 days. So we're seeing the changes and the precipitation changes. What is worrisome is that it's meant to get more erratic and more violent And so when it comes right down to it, the problem that people are really going to experience is that they're going to starve to death. Because if you're a farmer and you're planting crops and you don't know this year, is it going to be hot and sunny and no rain? Is it going to be, am I going to get a giant rainstorm and flooding in July? Is it going to snow in August? I don't know what's going to happen. So you plant your best guess, and maybe you get lucky and maybe you don't. But what that's going to do is dramatically reduce output of farmers. And we are pretty overpopulated as a species. So when there is less food available, people are going to feel it. And as you said, it's going to be the poorest among us that feel it worst and hardest.
Right. And we also don't talk about the refugee crisis that's going to happen, because there's going to be areas in the world that are going to be inhabitable. We look at the Middle East, how hot it is at times over there. You go back to the US, you look at New York City, could be underwater too. We didn't mention that, but that's a big possibility with millions upon millions upon millions of people there. I do want to talk about this. I know you passed a plastic bag ban over in your city, which is great. I know that the government vetoed that. As far as what was that? The governor that did that?
No, not only did they not veto it, but about a year after we passed it, the state passed a bag ban.
Oh,
so now it's statewide.
Okay, great. So we talk about this as far as combating climate change. We've heard the Green New Deal, which I support, and Bernie has a significantly great climate change plan that he's established as a presidential candidate. What would be your plan to combat climate change as far as being in Congress? And, would it be a certain bill, or what would you do to that effect?
It's going to be a whole raft of stuff, right? That's why the Green New Deal makes a lot of sense.
Right.
It gives you the bandwidth to mobilize this country like we mobilized for World War II, and to really invest in solving the problems. So it's a whole raft of things. We stop subsidizing all the fossil fuels immediately. That would be a first step. Then we put some kind of a price signal on carbon, whether it's a cap and trade, or a cap and dividend, or I don't really care what it is, as long as over time carbon is meant to be more expensive. What that will do is cause private investment to move out of carbon and into renewables. And then obviously we would be investing ourselves in renewables, hiring millions of people to build solar arrays and wind farms, and there's concepts around tidal energy and wave energy, geothermal energy. There's all these different ways we can produce energy, and then there's ways to store it. There's ways to use it better. We can have smart grids that allow energy to flow both ways out of houses. We can start producing hydrogen when we've got too much wind and sun, that can then be stored in our natural gas systems to be used later in peaking plants, or even the way we're using natural gas now. We need to completely change agriculture. The way the industrial farming that we do is damaging on a lot of levels. The dead zones in the ocean that you see down in Louisiana, Mississippi, and out on the Oregon coast are from all the nutrient running off the land and into the ocean. That nutrient has to be applied to those soils because they've killed those soils, and those soils no longer hold carbon. So if we start to farm in a sustainable method, we can start to store a lot of carbon back in the soil. So there's a whole raft of them. I mean, we got to plant 1 trillion trees. We got to protect the forests we have. We have to change the way we're logging. There's 100 different ways that we need to address this.
Last question on climate. I hear a lot of people talking about climate change that are running for office. I don't hear a lot about this, though. We look at water as an issue. We look at as you spoke about, with all these nitrogens and all these all the stuff that they put in the soil running off, going into our water supplies, contaminated water, which we
Yep.
see all over the country now. It was happened in Flint. It happened in Newark, New Jersey. Now they're having issues with water, and it's all over the country. So I would like you to talk about water as an issue. Do you hear a lot about people talking about water? And the second part about that is we talked a lot about in our oceans with fish. Where there's a lot of dead zones. We talk, no, I don't hear a lot of people talking about overfishery also. And not just that, the fish that we're eating, that they're catching, a lot of that fish is ingesting plastics, whether, because of all the plastics we have. So we need to also get rid of all this plastic water bottles that everybody uses now, which, you can't just get a regular water bottle and wash it and reuse it.
I don't.
Which you got, yes, Maya. But not a lot of people talk about the fish ingesting the plastics and also the water issue in general.
So one of the things a lot of times after I tell that story about the whale shark,
right,
then one of the next lines that I usually say is that the National Geographic estimates that because of climate change, oil spills, overfishing, excessive nutrient runoff, plastics and other pollution, by the year 2048, the oceans will be effectively dead.
Jeez.
And that's obviously, that's definitely within your lifetime. It's potentially within my lifetime that we will literally see the vast 2/3 of this planet will be effectively dead. So absolutely, we have to clean up our act on every level. We have to stop climate change so we stop acidifying the oceans. In Oregon, one of the big industries is the shellfish industry. They grow a lot of oysters. The baby oysters can't even form shells right now because the water is too high in acid. The water is too high in acid because the ocean has been uptaking all the CO2 we have put in the air. If it hadn't, climate change would be even worse than it is already. So that's that piece of it. There's a ton of work we need to do with the oceans. But you're absolutely right on freshwater. It is probably the next thing that we will have wars about. It is why a lot of the tragedy at the border with people coming up from Central America, a lot of those folks are there because they can no longer farm. They can no longer, they can't survive any longer on their subsistence farms. And a lot of that is due to water. There's ongoing droughts. So between the droughts, between glaciers melting, so a lot of the Western United States, at least, the summer water that we utilize in Colorado and Oregon and Washington and Montana, Idaho, and to some degree even California, comes from glacier melt during the summer, right? If there are no more glaciers, there's no water to be produced in the summer. We have poisoned through fracking, and we have overdrawn on a lot of the subterranean water, right? That there's not an endless supply of groundwater, but in certain parts of the country, they have been using it so heavily that the water table is dropping dramatically. So we've got that problem. We're poisoning other groundwater with fracking. We've poisoned a lot of the surface water, as you pointed out earlier, with the pesticides and the herbicides and all the industrial waste that for years we thought we could just dump things into the river. You sound like you're from somewhere up in the Northeast.
Rhode Island.
Yeah, there you go. I'm guessing you know about some of the rivers that caught fire, 20, 30 years ago. They were so polluted.
Yeah. What is your biggest accomplishment as mayor of Milwaukie?
Well, it had to do with the climate action that we're doing. So in order to get my council there, we went through a whole process. First, we did a visioning, and out of the visioning, we wrote a really amazing vision with the input of the whole community. And the first line of that vision says that by 2040, Milwaukie will be a flourishing city that is entirely equitable, delightfully livable, and completely sustainable. And then it goes on and details all of that um, it's like a 30-page, 40-page document. We then took that and we built our climate action plan, and now we're doing our comprehensive plan, which is baking all of that into the actual code and zoning in the city. So it can't, I mean, it would be really hard to pull it back out. In that, there are things that we know we need to do. So in the climate action plan, we know that we need more people walking and biking rather than driving their cars. So one of the biggest things, one of the things that shocks most other mayors when I tell them about it, is we're investing $52 million over the next 9 years in bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So all of our schools will have safe routes to schools. You'll be able to walk or bike safely from the grocery store to the housing complexes, to the old folks' homes. It will be an amazing network of bike paths and bike lanes and good sidewalks throughout the city. And we did that with we added money to a charge on the water bill of $4.85. But the day that hit people's mailbox the first time, we got exactly 2 angry phone calls, because we had put so much effort into the process, and so many people had input and said, we need a crosswalk there, we need a sidewalk over there, we need a flashing yellow beacon here. So everybody had buy-in by the time we did it. $52 million, that is 1/3 of our city's annual budget. It's a huge amount of money. So that was a big lift, and it'll make the city much more equitable, much more livable, and obviously much more sustainable.
What about public transportation? We don't hear a lot of, I see this issue in Orlando, and when I went to school in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale and Miami, there's not a lot of money that's, we're in Florida, of course, but there's not a lot of money put into public transportation, buses. We have a lot of people that work at Disney, Universal, all these theme parks, and a lot of them take 2 or 3 buses to work. They're going to leave like 3 or 4 hours to get to their job, which is insane. Then plus they're there 8, 9 hours a day. That's like a full long day of, that's crazy. I don't know how some people do it. But did you talk about that when you were talking about as far as a green policy for your town?
Yeah, so like I said, we're part of the greater Portland metro region. Portland metro region has a mass transit system called TriMet. TriMet has one of the better light rail systems in the country. And then interspersed with that light rail system, there's a pretty good bus system. Now, if you live on the opposite side of the metro region from your job, and it's just, you're in the wrong place, it could still take you a couple hours to get to work in the morning. So one of the many committees I sit on at the metro level is a committee right now that's looking at how do we improve our mass transit system. And myself and a couple of the other mayors and several activists are really trying to ramp up our bus system so that not only do we have more buses and they're more frequent, but they're on routes that separate them from the traffic so that they're not stuck in the traffic, or that we put bus-only lanes on streets so that when people are sitting there in that congestion every morning, they're watching the bus go by them, so they're thinking, damn, I should get out of my car and go get on the bus. That's our goal. It's going to be a huge lift to get there. But as far as the Milwaukie part of it, we do have written into our climate action plan to add shuttle services within our city to get folks from the neighborhoods down to the light rail station, and from the light rail station out to the industrial areas for the jobs. So we hope to have that. It's going to probably be a couple of years. Everything always takes forever.
I agree. And thanks so much for your time, Mayor Gammon, here on Fire Breathing Rob. I have a question about this. I hear a lot about homelessness all over the country. We just had somebody on that talked about Skid Row in Los Angeles, but we see a lot of homeless people here in Florida as the warm climate. I hear a lot about homelessness in Portland. Can you talk about why there's so many homeless flocking toward Portland? It's not extremely warm city. You guys do have winter, where
Yeah.
we don't have that extreme of a winter, obviously down here, and California doesn't either. So can you talk about why there's such a big homeless population in Portland, Oregon?
Yeah, very few of them are imports. Most of the
Okay.
people that are homeless, and I know this because a friend of mine actually did research, did a really robust study about 3 years ago. I was sitting on an advisory committee around homelessness, and this guy that works for Health, Housing, and Human Services went out and interviewed literally 25% of the homeless population. So we know exactly where they come from. They come from the Portland metro region. As a matter of fact, where most of them were camped, they could practically point to the last place that they were housed. The reason there are so many homeless in Portland and the entire West Coast and in every other metropolitan region, honestly, it's across the country, is because the cost of housing has risen far faster than jobs have, right? So think about this. I'm sure that you've experienced it in Florida. Rents will go up maybe 8 or 10% every year, right? Rent for just a
Right.
typical 2-bedroom, nothing special kind of apartment. So let's say you got into that apartment and it was a $700 apartment when you got it, and you were stretching to pull it off because you only made, whatever, $2,000 a month. But you're like, okay, I can handle that. I can make that. But every year it goes up 10%. Pretty soon you're paying 50% of your income just for your rent. And eventually that becomes untenable. Your car breaks down, you have a medical issue, any other thing, and you're out on the street. That's what's going on. And it is across the country. We have allowed, as a government, the federal government, to hold the minimum wage down at $7.25 an hour, which causes the whole rest of the tier of job payment to also be lower. And at the same time, we're totally allowing housing to be whatever the market will bear. So there is no place in the Portland metro region where someone earning the average pay can afford an average 2-bedroom apartment.
To end the interview, Mayor Gamba, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. Can you tell the viewers, first of all, why they should vote for you instead of Kurt Schroeder, and also where they can find you, help you, and donate for you?
Sure. So I'll start with the last one. It's markgamba.com. Very simple. markgamba.com. If all the things we talked about today are anything that you care about, if you care about ending homelessness through causing people to be paid a living wage, not just barely on the edge of functioning wage, if you care about every single person in this country having world-class medical care, and by the way, saving the country money in the process, if you care about having a livable planet in 40 years, it is critical that we get rid of as many of the neoliberals as we can get. And neoliberals of Democratic or Republican stripe, I don't really care. They are the problem. We have to get rid of them. And I am not that. I am a practical person. The things that I have done in the city of Milwaukee, we're building 400 new units of affordable housing. On a per capita basis, that's probably more affordable housing units than any place else, because our entire, I think there's only, 9,000 households in the city of Milwaukee, right?
Oh, wow.
Under my term in office, we have gotten so much done because I'm practical, because I can pull people together, because I can inspire positive change. Schroeder has been at best a backbencher. A former congressman called him a windsock. He is, and he's completely sold out to the pharmaceutical industry, to the oil, coal, and gas industries, to Monsanto, to Comcast. He is the worst kind of politician, Democrat or Republican. It doesn't really matter, because if you're sold out to the corporations, you are not looking out for the people.
Well, not even that, Mayor. You've ran a city. He hasn't. You have the legislative experience like that. He's been sitting around in Congress. He's 1 out of 435. You're telling everybody that if you get to Congress, you're going to go in there and kick some ass. And that's what we need, people that are going to go in there and kick ass, not people that are just going to, I was going to say, I won't say that, but I'm going to sit there with their finger up their ass. But we don't want people to just sit there and hang around and just, get their contributions and become rich in Congress. That's why I believe we need term limits in general. But thank you so much, Mayor, for your time. And you're awesome, and I appreciate you. And I think the people of Oregon need a fighter like you, but not just Oregon. The people of America need some more people like you to fight in the Congress and in their cities and states in general. So thanks so much for your time, and I appreciate it.
You betcha. Thank you for having me on.